We'll be starting this webinar at the top of the hour, so y'all can be working on your other screens for a bit here, and then we will get started. Started now. I am Susan Ingalls, and I am delighted to welcome you all to today's Sustainability Essentials webinar, in which we are going to be discussing forest health and your wood choices with special guests, David Gehl from the Environmental Investigation Agency and Brad Kahn of Forest Stewardship Council are with us today. We all want to hear from you. And I will say I had turned off my webcam, but we did get audience feedback that they like having the webcams on. So I'm going to invite David and Brad to turn their webcams back on anytime they like. And so thank you both for being with us. We are delighted to have the entire audience with us, and we want to hear from you, but we have you on mute. So please send in your questions and comments using the box on the right of your screen. And at the end of our presentation, I will read those questions and comments and we will respond. To start with, I am going to tell you a little bit about Sustainable Furnishings Council. We are in our 15th year now. We are a membership organization, 400 companies now that are involved in the residential furnishings industry in various ways. So supplying materials like wood, manufacturing all manner of furnishings products, stores where these things are sold, design firms, and importantly, international conservation organizations are part of our work. When we started, our first job was to determine what are best practices for sustainability and to set standards. Then we got very busy educating the industry and building markets for companies that we are delighted to be highlighting. We found that our work was interesting much beyond our membership. So eventually we started the Sustainable Furnishings Education Fund. We are an educational organization more than anything else. So if you are interested in the kinds of things that we are discussing today, please consider getting involved with us. Members each make a public and verifiable commitment to sustainability and to transparency and to continuous improvement, and we support them with not only education, guidance, resources, but also with marketing support. Using the member seal is a privilege that members enjoy, for instance. And the educational programming is like our Green Leaders Certificate course is available to you whether your company is a member or not. Sustainability is complex and covers a range of interrelated issues. Our industry has a relatively large environmental footprint for our size, and that adds gravitas to the choices that we make as professionals and as consumers. So we're going to review the facts here. We are a global manufacturing industry. We burn a lot of fossil fuel to generate the electricity we use in our factories and to ship raw materials as well as finished goods all over the world, which results, of course, in lots of CO2 emissions, which are blanketing our atmosphere and causing global warming. The warming impact of those greenhouse gas emissions is well mitigated by healthy forests. By now, we know that keeping our forests healthy and planting more and more trees is the most efficient way to fight climate change. Since we use so much wood in our industry, we have a particular responsibility to do our part on that front, sourcing wood products carefully. We also have a particular responsibility to reduce indoor air pollution. There are thousands of harmful chemicals used to make consumer products, but there are just 5 that are particularly common in furnishings, and each is persistent in the environment and linked directly to harm to human health. Many of them occur in textiles, which are particularly chemical intensive to produce, whether from natural fiber or from synthetics. And some particularly noxious chemicals like chromium salts are used in tanning leathers. If they're not properly handled at the factory, they can cause death and destruction downstream. There are social equity issues in production of many furnishings products. Indigenous peoples exploited for extraction of wood from the forests that are their home, factory workers paid less than a living wage, and even forced labor still used in cotton cultivation in 19 countries. Finally, we throw away an awful lot of furniture, crowding landfills to overflowing. So we at Sustainable Furnishings Council do our best to help guide the industry in addressing these problems and to help you find the more environmentally safe furnishings you would prefer. Why is this so important? Because our planet is in serious trouble and we will not be able to sustain life as we know it unless we change our habits. Thinking about our whole homes, including the planet that is our home, is important in each of the choices we make. Here we're seeing how the planet has warmed since early in the Industrial Revolution with these weather anomalies, which healthy forests can help ease and mitigate. Out of our concern for healthy forests, and because we know that we have such responsibility for those forests, in 2018, we came together with our partners at National Wildlife Federation to create the Wood Furniture Scorecard. And our goal with this scorecard is to promote responsible wood sourcing in the North American furniture industry by defining leadership and recognizing leaders. The results, we are just now getting started on our 2021 assessments. And what we're covering today with our guests is going to clarify for some of you how you can score high. The results will be announced in October, and we are here to help. Until then, we want you to be leaders in forest stewardship. And so how do you do that with your wood sourcing habits? The most obvious example of leadership in sourcing wood is to use wood that is recycled or reclaimed or salvaged that might otherwise go to waste. This choice contributes, of course, to solving 2 problems, the overloading of landfills as well as the deforestation. But there is not an infinite supply of wood from these kinds of sources. And even at the beginning of their lives, those pieces of wood came from trees, came from forests. So harvesting trees from well-managed forests, harvesting responsibly from forests and plantations is another very important choice. Responsible forestry preserves or restores the health and integrity of forest ecosystems. It minimizes the use of chemicals and preserves the natural fertility of the soil, protecting against erosion and maintaining the quality of streams and rivers, conserves wildlife habitat and biodiversity. And there's this important human dimension as well. Truly responsible forestry upholds the well-being of forest-dependent communities and respects the rights of indigenous people. And of course, true sustainability requires that human communities as well as plant and animal communities are respected with attention to that entire ecosystem. That can be assured by forest certification, which is voluntary market-based tool that is used to promote responsible forestry. There are numerous systems for forest certification, and we'll be hearing today about Forest Stewardship Council certification, which we believe is the most important one. In our wood furniture scorecard, we assess companies. As we assess these companies, we look in the public domain on their websites for information about their policy for sourcing wood furniture. We wonder if they have one, if it's robust. Then we look for evidence that it's being implemented well. And then we note what else we learn about the company's commitment to sustainability. This year, there are 32 points that companies can earn, and that's up from 24 points in our first edition. Our methodology puts an emphasis not only on formal, publicly available policies, but also on continuous improvement. We're going to have a quick look at the methodology, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this now because I think we'll come back to this during the Q&A. So we do look for specific elements of the policy, and we look for specific practices and performance measures when we're looking at how the policy is being implemented. And then we look for other evidence of a commitment, including advertising what you were offering in the way of certified or reclaimed furniture products. Here are some elements of a robust wood sourcing policy, and we again can come back to this in the Q&A in more detail, because I think that you will, when you hear from our guests, you'll be interested in noting how you can incorporate the kinds of things they're talking about in a policy you might yet be developing. But these are what you want to look for. You want to look for the or work towards in your policy the preservation of forest ecosystems, which of course is going to be connected to lots of other things. That ecosystem health is what really makes a difference in sustaining a healthy future. And so with this, I am very pleased to introduce David Gehl, who is Manager of Traceability and Technologies with the Environmental Investigation Agency. And I am giving you, David, control of advancing your slides now. So I want to thank you very much for being here, and I hope you'll find it's easy to advance your slides. If not, I will do it for you, okay?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Susan. My name is David Gehl. I'm the manager for Traceability and Technologies at the Environmental Investigation Agency. We're based in Washington, D.C. And today I'll be speaking about illegal logging risks and the need for consumer-facing transparency. And let's see if this is working. There we go. Great. First off, let me say I'm honored to be here today and speaking, and thank you very much, Susan, for the invite. EIA has had the pleasure to work with Susan and the Sustainable Furnishings Council and other industry and nonprofit partners for many years, pushing for a strong application of the U.S. Lacey Act to support the law's original intention of creating a level playing field for all companies in the wood product sector to prevent illegally logged timber from reaching US markets and undercutting US products. So the Environmental Investigation Agency, we're a 501c3 nonprofit with offices in DC and London, and we're focused on addressing the drivers of environmental crime. We have 3 campaigns looking at illegal wildlife trade, illegal deforestation, and atmospheric chemicals. And in addition to the investigations and research that we conduct to try to find, how illegally sourced products are coming into consumer markets, we're really committed to finding solutions to create a legal and sustainable timber trade. These are policy, legal, but also technical solutions, which I'll be focused on mostly in this presentation. Let's coordinate this here, sorry.
Is this where you want to be? The
Great,
illegal business model?
Yeah, sorry, there's a delay
Good.
on the slide. So.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so now we see the illegal logging business model.
Yeah, just trying to go back one more, then it's going forward. Sorry about that. I was trying to go back to just the illegal logging slide.
Okay, I'll take care of that for
Sure.
you.
Okay, I think that's good because there's a delay when I click it and then.
Yep. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so talking about illegal logging. Illegal logging, what is it? It's timber harvested in contravention of applicable laws and regulations. Interpol estimates the total value of this, including processing, at between 30 and 100 billion US dollars, and that's about 10 to 30% of the global wood trade. So it's very, very sizable trade. It has severe impacts all around the world, including the degradation of forests, which contribute also to global climate change, biodiversity loss, and also the destruction of livelihoods for forest-dependent communities. It also undermines economic development by depriving responsible companies of profits and robbing governments of more than $10 billion in revenue each year. Now, illegal logging business model, I mean, to think of illegal logging, just think of stealing trees. It's basically forest mining. So illegal loggers are going to the forest and extracting the highest value timber. So this involves over-harvesting, cutting forbidden species, logging in protected areas, and getting all kinds of fake permits to do things to try to cover your actions. A lot of this relies on small-scale logging teams, which are covered by a forest mafia, which really is involving police and judges and lots of other levels of society, who are then conducting bribery to obtain concession permits and to avoid penalties. And at the bigger scale, you have a lot of very large companies which are offshoring profits to avoid taxation in those countries. Now, it's really, really hard with any criminal activity to get a clear estimate of how risky a particular country or particular sector is. The best proxy for that we find is Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. And so when you look at this map and you look at any of the countries that are basically orange, sort of deeper orange to a red color, those are high-risk countries. Those are ones, I think it's above 50 in Transparency International scale. And that just means those are the highest risk countries for corruption. And those are countries that if you're sourcing from those countries, you just have to take extra due care. I'd like to give just a couple quick case studies. The first one is of Brazil, and you have a number of species, Ipe, Jatobá, which in the US market are known as Brazilian walnut, Brazilian cherry, Brazilian redwood. These are widely used in the manufacture of garden furniture and decking. Unfortunately, many of these are illegally sourced, and illegal logging in Brazil is really, really widespread. Greenpeace Brazil has conducted research into this for many years, and in a report they released a couple of years ago, they looked at all Ipe and some other hardwoods that ended up in US and EU markets. And they traced that back to the forest where they were able to collect information about that. And they found that for all the products that were sent to the US and EU, 70% of those products they found were actually stolen wood, you know, that actual wood. So it's a huge amount of products that ended up in the US and EU markets. Now, as I'm sure you've all heard, things like cattle ranching, soy are much bigger drivers of deforestation in the Amazon than illegal logging. But it's important to think about what illegal logging does to the jungle. And Greenpeace describes illegal logging as Ipe rather, as a gateway timber, like a gateway drug. So Ipe is the most valuable species, and legal loggers will enter previously untouched areas, often in indigenous lands, hunting for Ipe. And once they find the Ipe, then they make informal roads to get that out. Once those roads are there, then that opens up hunting for other species and eventually opens up for cattle raising or soy or other things. So Ipe is really the thing that drives the opening up of new territory that is protected territory in Brazil and in the Amazon. Now, this is the case of Brazil, but in general, tropical timber comes at a very high risk of illegal logging, given the elevated corruption levels, the high value of wood in relatively poor countries, and this creates a strong incentive for illegal loggers. So we see similar narratives playing out across Latin America, but also Africa, Southeast Asia. Next slide. Illegal logging isn't just a problem for tropical forests. So the high levels of corruption that remain in the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc make it easy for illegal loggers to flout laws in the forest to cut high-value trees under the guise of clearing beetle-infested ones, or to cut beyond the legal sustainable quota limits. These tree thieves take their stolen logs to rural log depots, like in the picture here, or to small local sawmills. And at the point they arrive there, they're impossible to distinguish from the legally cut ones. They all get mixed in together, and a lot of the sectors that are buying wood from these small sawmills or from the log depots are then contaminated with this stolen wood. And this ends up in international markets in America and all over the world as simple products like framing timber, edge-glued lumber, also mass timber, getting into some of the big new wooden skyscrapers that you're hearing about, wood flooring, and a lot of furniture products. And that involves the solid wood, but also in the fiberboard going into these furniture products. And importantly, these species, many of the species are species that grow in America too. Spruce, fir, oak, ash, elm, basswood, walnut, maple. So if you're sourcing that product or furniture made from one of those woods from a country like China, for instance, you have to be really careful to make sure that that is American wood or somehow sourced legally, because there's a high chance it could have come from Russia or possibly illegally sourced in Eastern Europe. And now, since going to the Lacey Act slide, since 2008, it's against the law to knowingly or unknowingly import a wood product that was legally harvested or traded in contravention of the laws of the country that it came from. And now all importers of wood products to the US must follow due care to ensure to the best of their abilities. So that's a higher level standard for Walmart than it is for a mom and pop shop on the corner, that they are not importing illegally sourced or traded timber or wood products. Now, for many wood products, importers have to file a declaration for every shipment called the PPQ 505. And on that, they have to list the species name and the country of harvest for that wood. And since the Lacey Act amendments in 2008, the EU, Australia, Japan, South Korea have all passed similar laws. And so we've been pushing for many years, and we're very hopeful that China will come on board with this soon. So for the next slide on traceability, to comply with Lacey, many companies have turned to various certification schemes, some of which are more credible than others. So credible certification systems, such as the FSC, can help when used as a tool in conducting due care. But unfortunately, none of them currently provide you with real traceability back to the source, with assurances that illegal timber wasn't mixed into your supply chain at places like those rural log depots or small sawmills, things like that. What is needed instead is real traceability. Now, traceability means the ability to track the raw materials used in a product back to their origins. In the case of wood products, that means the forest where they were cut. Illegal timber continues to be laundered into international supply chains because of information gaps at many points in the wood product supply chain. Now, timber supply chains are complex and traceability is hard and very hard when you're talking about a product like furniture, of course. But where it's needed, I mean, to lock down E. coli infections in spinach or to remove contaminated pharmaceuticals from shelves, traceability is possible. And if we are really serious about keeping illegal timber out of our supply chains and to make sure that the wood we're using is actually sustainable and will actually be replanted, then we need to bring traceability to the wood product sector as well. Now, there are a number of new technologies that can help verify your supplier's claims, such as stable isotopes, DNA analysis, DART mass spectrometry. Now, these can't replace traceability, but they can use to check your traceability system to keep your suppliers honest. There's also a system called Declare, Map, and Test, and Declare, Map, and Test, and these technologies were covered in another sustainability webinar from my colleague Jason Grant at WWF last summer. So I really encourage you to check out that webinar as well if you haven't already. And next slide. So what is starting to change the landscape is the appearance of countrywide transparent traceability systems. Sorry for the previous slide, so on supply chain transparency. So at its core, transparent traceability systems are simply a digitization of the forest sector. So moving from a paper permitting system to a digital permitting system, something that's happened in most industries around the world, but is sort of slower to happen in wood product sector in many countries. Now, this action alone can help to make the fraud harder, but making the data public while protecting necessary proprietary company information is what brings real changes in corrupt countries. So the more information is transparent, the more legal compliance there will be. So for example, if there's public maps with the forest boundaries, it's easier to tell if loggers cut outside of those boundaries. If there's public information that a sanitary harvest was authorized in a specific place, then an independent forest expert can go and look at those trees and see, are they really infected or not? Should they really be marked for logging, this sort of thing. So the existence of a national transparent traceability system also gives buyers confidence, but it's important to understand how comprehensive and how effective the system is. So you still have to conduct due care. It just makes it easier. So in the next slide, I'll talk about Romania's forest inspector. Romania is an interesting case in this because Romania had a traceability system and digital permits since 2014. But 2 years later, there's a new government that made a public website, the Forest Inspector, and a mobile app for users to actually see some of the information in real time from the system. And so what we're seeing on the screen here, all those dots represent the timber transport permit. So before a truck driver starts a journey, he has to fill out a digital permit on an app, with an app on a smartphone or tablet. And that permit then goes immediately into the central system, and that's immediately visible to anyone in the public. So as he drives with his truckload of logs, any person with a smartphone that he passes by can use the Forest Inspector app, type in the license plate number, and get an immediate answer. Is that truck legal or illegal? And if it's illegal, meaning it doesn't have a registered permit, they're connected directly to the police to report that. So in the summer of 2016, within 3 months of this app going live, the number of transport permits being requested by companies increased by 60%. So that really shows you that when it was just the chance of being pulled over by a police officer versus the chance of anyone with a cell phone reporting you directly and that going straight to the police, that really changed the calculation for the illegal transporters.
Mm-hmm.
So going on to the next slide, what does all this mean to the American consumer? Now, currently, consumers don't know where the wood that they're buying from comes from. And unfortunately, most retailers don't either. At the same time, consumers are increasingly highly aware of the threats to forests, and they want to do more. They don't want their purchases to be funding this deforestation, but they have few ways of knowing whether the products they're buying are actually linked to this or not. And consumers currently have an expectation of not knowing where the raw materials in their products come from. So we at EIA, we've created a new tool to help solve these problems. So on the last slide. In about a week on Earth Day, EIA will officially launch the Origin app, which will initially be available on iOS for iPhones and tablets. Origin app users can scan, search for, or browse wood products to discover what kind of wood they contain and where this timber was harvested. You can browse a list of products that already have declared origin information, and you can request the company, the manufacturer, the retailer to share this information with you. This information is provided by retailers either working directly with the EIA or gathered from public information on company or retailer websites. Now, the core information contained in the app really shouldn't be too hard to obtain. So remember the Lacey Act PPQ 505 declaration that the importers have to file. So this means that for all wood that is traded in the US, either if it was imported, the importer had to already get this information. They needed to find the origin, the country of harvest and the species information. Or if it's domestic wood, then that's easy, that's American wood. So this information should be easy for companies to obtain, relatively easy. What we want to do is really create a new rationale for companies to implement supply chain traceability to know the origin of the timber. And it's also an easy way for responsible companies to showcase what they're already doing. So the idea is really that if you have Origin app users in the public who've scanned a product and see that there isn't origin information with it, and they can either tweet or write to the company directly, or just click a button and EIA, add their name to, not their name, but just add a click to a tally of number of users who want to know origin information for this. So if you have a product that doesn't have origin information and 200 users have said, I want origin information for this, then that can really empower, I think, a sustainability officer to go to the boardroom and say, look, there's a market for this information. This is why we have to spend the extra money to establish a traceability, because then we can have this, this new market. So we really think that this tool can help to bring the interest of consumers really to bear and encourage companies to establish better traceability and to be more transparent to their customers about their products. Thank you all for your time and attention, and thank you again, Susan, for the invite. And please contact me if you're interested in having your products in the app. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David. That's very interesting and exciting to learn about. And now we are going to learn from Brad Kahn at Forest Stewardship Council about this very important certification, Forest Stewardship Council certification.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the Sustainable Furnishings Council for this opportunity. Do I have control of my slides here? Let's see how.
You do, and if there's too much delay, I'll do it for you.
I think I'll work on my timing. We'll see how that goes. Well, appreciate everyone showing up today. Brad Kahn, I'm the Communications Director for the Forest Stewardship Council in the United States. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of FSC and how it ties to illegal logging and also the furniture sector specifically. So created in 1994, FSC was the first forest certification in the world, really a response to a failure by governments at the Rio Earth Summit to come up with a comprehensive solution to deforestation. So FSC was created as a voluntary market-based system to try to both incentivize responsible management and provide assurance to consumers and companies that the wood that they are using is from responsibly managed forests, which certainly includes legal. That's really the first principle of our standard. About 500 million acres globally are FSC certified. About 160 million acres in the United States and Canada meet the FSC standards. There are 46,000 companies in the FSC system, mostly chain of custody certified, which means within the supply chain. And FSC is a member-led organization. So these issues are complex, they are rapidly evolving, and we have no better way of trying to stay on top of what's important and frankly, what does it mean to manage a forest responsibly than to bring together economic, social, and environmental interests to try to identify consensus. Now, certainly, there are some who would say we should have stronger environmental protections or stronger social protections, but if the market isn't willing to actually manage forests to those standards and then trade in those products, we really don't have the uptake. So it's that consensus between these three chambers that really ultimately is the credibility and the integrity of the FSC system. And these are honestly just a subset of our membership with good logos. So to those members out in the audience who don't see yourselves, apologies, but there are many in the furniture sector, and you know, frankly, any of you on this call today are invited to become members and start to participate in the systems and the discussions that FSC organizes. And I've hit next, and here we go. All right, globally. This is just a map of the distribution of FSC certified forests. And honestly, while the dark green shows more uptake and the light green shows less, if you notice, there's obviously a strong skewing towards the northern latitudes. And there is a lot of rationale and strength to this. It is wonderful in the United States to have a lot of local options within US and Canada for FSC certified supply. We are prioritizing work in tropical countries, which also tend to be, you know, developing countries with higher risk of corruption. And this is where we get into the discussion that David was just presenting. It is, you know, it is challenging sometimes to provide assurance in places where rule of law is not always rigorously enforced. But yet, when we look globally at the most significant forests that are at risk of deforestation or degradation, many of those forests are in tropical regions. And so this is sort of the crux of FSC's development and growth globally, is how to engage responsibly in places where rule of law is not always what happens, and how to do that, provide assurance in sync with the rule of law and other governance structures that also must exist. Just quickly how FSC works. We have a variety of different standards, probably best known for forest management certification, which is I'm going to get into a little bit more in the following slides. But we also, the larger part of our system, honestly, is the chain of custody certification. So each step from when a log leaves the forest, every step of the supply chain must be FSC chain of custody certified in order to maintain that integrity from the forest to the end user. And you can see a few example supply chains here, including furniture in blue in the middle. Importantly, and building on what David just said, FSC is not a traceability standard. We are providing assurance that the wood supports responsible forest management. There is assurance around legality, although no one can guarantee legality, and that includes FSC. But our membership, honestly, has not required traceability. You know, frequently supplier agreements are confidential and competitively negotiated. I might have my own personal opinions on this, but at the end of the day, being a member-led system means we follow what our members agree to. And so we do have traceability initiatives underway and also wood ID initiatives that use forensic testing. But I want to just be clear that today FSC is an assurance system, not a traceability system. And I can go more into that in Q&A if people want to talk more about it. These are the three on-product labels. 100% on the left says every bit of wood in this product came from an FSC certified forest. Recycled is basically a third-party verification of salvage or reclaimed sourcing, and this can also be used in paper. So it can be post or pre-consumer recycled fiber on the paper or packaging side. And then mix is probably the most common label in the marketplace, or it is, and it basically recognizes inputs that are from FSC certified forests, from recycled or reclaimed sources, as well as a small component of what we could call controlled wood. And mixed is honestly a recognition of the compromise that exists in our system between sort of demands for rigor on one end and demands for economic feasibility and practicality on the other side. And the mixed label really allows for flexibility in how mills and manufacturers handle FSC certified products. And this is a deep, deep rabbit hole that I'm happy to crawl down in Q&A if anyone wants to go deeper on it. But those are the labels in the marketplace. And I've hit the next slide, come on.
And we see FSC.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, and this one's kind of a throwaway. Let me talk a little bit about FSC in the forest. And this is going to require some deft slide advancing. I'll take a brief pause. Okay, so let's start with the basic. FSC is a voluntary nonprofit organization-led system. So we are not Interpol, and we are not a national, provincial, state, local government. We have no enforcement abilities other than to withdraw our certification from companies, which we do. But we start our system with prohibiting deforestation, or as it's known in the forestry sector, conversion. And that includes natural forests to plantations, or natural forests or plantations to non-forest uses. Our goal is always to try to incentivize and reward natural forests first, and even on our plantation standard, to try to encourage managers to begin moving some portion of that land back into natural forest management. So prohibiting conversion. We are the only forest certification system in the world to actually say deforestation is prohibited under our system, by the way. And that the following slides are unique aspects of FSC. Susan referenced other certifications. I won't go into it now, but these aspects of FSC set us apart and really are driven by our members. I've hit next slide, so let's see. Oh, there we go. This is legal forestry in the United States. Nothing you see here is illegal. This is not a great day for forestry in the United States. This is after a heavy rain event in Southwest Washington, but nothing illegal here. So FSC requires, this is not FSC certified, let me be clear. We limit the openings, especially on steep slopes, but everywhere in the world, we will limit managers the size of the clear cuts and the openings that they can cut, requiring what's called retention, trees to be left behind to protect forest ecology. That in this case, that's the stream that is down in the bottom of that basin, obviously the soils that have slid off the hillside here. All of those values, those ecological values, would be protected under the FSC system, and something like this would not be allowed. This is certified under another system. This is certified as sustainable, I should note. I would not call it that, nor would FSC. I gotta start hitting next slide sooner, I guess.
We're looking at FSC protects rare old growth.
Oh, okay. All right. My screen is great. Thank you. Yeah, everywhere in the lower 48 states, old growth, wherever it remains, is rare, and thus it is protected. And rare is the important operable system and word here. Old growth, it's really protected under what's called high conservation value forests, forests that bring unique conservation values to that area. That could be habitat for rare, threatened, endangered species. That could be rare forest characteristics or types. Those could be cultural values as well. Special places for indigenous people, for example, cultural, religious areas. But I want to highlight that in some parts of the world where there is only old growth or primary forest, as it may be called, FSC does allow some management, and this would be an example where our social chamber has weighed in and said, just because Europe and North America cut down all their old growth 100 years ago and now have plenty of second growth to manage, it's not fair for us in some places to totally be prohibited from managing our forest because all we have is primary forest. So this would be another example of where FSC does allow some management, especially at a small scale in primary forest. This would be in, say, the boreal forest of Canada, and it's driven largely by interests of local communities and indigenous people. So these issues are complicated, which is why for 25 years we've been bringing together different stakeholders to debate the issues. We also do have protections for what's called intact forest landscapes. So even as some primary forest harvest may happen, we are protecting the overall landscape because, as David indicated, once you start the road building process, it can lead to much broader management and ultimately conversion into other uses. This is a woodland caribou, a iconic species of the boreal forest of Canada, and a species that requires intact forest landscapes. FSC requires forest managers not just to follow the laws, so in the United States that would be the Endangered Species Act, but actually to go well beyond that and look at a population level where species are in decline. They might not be formally protected as threatened or endangered, but if the population is in decline in that area, FSC is going to require protection of habitat for that species. We take the precautionary principle, which basically says, not only do no harm, but where you're uncertain, then do the thing that's least likely to cause a problem in the future, recognizing that forests are complex systems and we don't always know what's going to happen. So the precautionary principle is one of the guiding principles of the FSC system. Forestry is a chemical intensive industry everywhere in the world. Frequently, these chemicals are known highly hazardous pesticides identified by the World Health Organization and the Pesticide Action Network are the two experts on these topics. You can look up highly hazardous pesticides. In the United States, these chemicals include things like 2,4-D, atrazine. These are some of the most commonly used chemicals in forestry. They are known carcinogens, they are endocrine disruptors, they are bioaccumulative, which means they go up the food chain until they get into humans, typically at the top of the food chain. They're nasty, and frequently, because you're managing large areas, they're applied by helicopters and airplanes. Obviously, it's tough to control where these poisons go when you spray them from the air. FSC will tightly restrict highly hazardous pesticides, and pesticides is actually the category that includes herbicides as well. We do allow some application. Our stated intent and goal is over the long term to move managers to the kind of management that does not require hazardous pesticide application, but we do allow some, typically the narrowest spectrum, which means the least toxic, as well as the narrowest application, typically by backpack sprayer or hand application. That obviously takes more work than spraying it from a helicopter or an airplane. But we think a lot about volatile organic compounds in furniture, for example, indoor air quality. Well, this is a social justice issue for people living in and around the forests. If you're spraying forests with toxic chemicals, the risk to human health and ecological health is pretty dramatic. FSC requires managers to offer what's called free, prior, and informed consent for Indigenous people and local communities. FPIC, as it's called in the international sector. FSC US is in the process of incorporating FPIC into our forest management standard right now. This basically, as you might suggest, in a place like Canada, where most forestry is happening on public Queen's lands, Indigenous people have been in those places since time immemorial, since humans emerged from the primordial muck. And they have cultural, traditional, religious uses of those lands, and thus in the FSC system they have traditional tenure over those lands, and thus before a manager harvests they have to receive free. You can't twist somebody's arm or offer them a bribe prior. That has to happen before the trees are cut. Informed, you actually have to say what we're doing, and consent. They have to deliberately offer consent. No response is not consent. Consent has to be proactive, offered from the relevant indigenous organizations and communities in the given place, which is really the leading edge of social protections and respect for indigenous rights globally. I'm just going to say a few words about illegal logging. I'm going to try to wrap it up quickly here if I can actually advance the slides fast enough.
Yes,
there's no silver bullet for legality. FSC is not a silver bullet. If you want to use FSC as part of due care, we certainly encourage it, and there is some legal precedent. The Gibson-Lacey Act enforcement is probably the most well-known one, but FSC is not a replacement for good governance and rule of law, especially in countries with high corruption indexes, as David mentioned. We have a transaction verification system that looks into especially high-risk supply chains, charcoal in some parts of the world. There are areas of the world where we do more investigative work. Again, we are a small nonprofit trying to manage 46,000 companies around the world. We would love to do more enforcement, but we do some where we have credible allegations of fraud in our system. We do product testing with a forensics lab looking at the composition. If the composition includes, say, mixed tropical hardwoods, that's going to be a sign of we should look into that supply chain. And as a customer or supplier, my general rule of thumb for people to follow is if the deal you're being offered looks too good to be true, then it probably is too good to be true. And it is hard to compete with illegal forest deforestation products. They are typically cheaper and they seem like a really good deal. Well, that should be a bright red warning flag to do a lot more due diligence and really understand where that wood came from. And
one simple action.
Okay, so we've launched today, a press release went out this morning, a new consumer-facing website called One Simple Action. We have, I think, about 4 or 5 furniture companies. I tried to take a screenshot that showed at least a few of them. We would love to have any FSC certified furniture company included in this. We are actually spending real money to promote this with consumers. We have a generous donor who has offered us resources to promote this. It's brand new and we would love to have you. You need to be either FSC certified, or if you're a retailer, you need to have a trademark license in effect, and we can talk about what that means. We also have a construction site for construction projects. Frequently, the same wood that's being used in construction can also be used in furniture manufacturing. So there are some options there if you're looking for suppliers. And I think I'm at the end of my slides here. Yes, and there's my email. If we can answer it in Q&A, great. And if not, feel free to email me. We would love to have you involved. We're doing a lot of work these days on the relationship between FSC and natural climate solutions and trying to quantify the carbon impacts of FSC. So that's not today's talk, but more to come on that and the relevance to the furniture sector. Thank you, Susan.
Great.
Thank you, Sustainable
Great.
Furnishing Council.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, David. And we have questions. So I'm just going to jump right into these questions. You can send further questions in the question box. The first question is for you, David. What is the risk of illegally harvested wood from America's forest? Should furniture manufacturers focus on U.S. wood resources to be assured of legal wood?
The U.S. domestic, it's a very good question. The U.S. domestic market is not something that EIA has really focused on and looked into. A number of years ago, there was a a very good comprehensive study. I mean, this is like 12 or 15 years ago now, but a very good comprehensive study that really looked at this problem. And they found that, yes, definitely there is illegal logging in the US, but the rate was quite low, maybe 1 or 2% of all the wood traded in the US. Now, this is different for some high value woods, and there have been some famous cases of timber theft of things like, I think it was big leaf maple up in the Pacific Northwest recently for guitars, or burls also for guitars and other things. So if you're buying a sort of more unique sort of precious wood from the US, then that's something that you need to pay more attention to. But otherwise, all indicators say that it's relatively safe from a legality perspective. Now, you'll still want to pay attention to sustainability, of course, but that's Brad's wheelhouse. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Now, here's a question for Brad that is about that picture that you showed of the mountainside falling into a stream. The question is, do you have a photo of that clear-cut area 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years later? So this is wondering about forest regeneration. I would like you to answer this question also talking about if it were 1 year later and it had been replanted in one kind of species or in the diverse species that might have been there when it was clear cut.
The short answer is no. We don't have, that was, those photos were given to us by someone who, flew a helicopter over it, and they have not offered us new ones. My guess is obviously some of that area would be reforested. There's likely to be some natural regeneration on steep slopes like that, where you see the soil sliding off the hillside. Typically the soils are pretty thin on those steep slopes anyway, and that's where you can get some longer lasting. It's not really deforestation because it's still within the forest matrix, but generally speaking, forests in the United States are allowed to regenerate either naturally or through planting. Certainly if you're a private forest management company, it's in your interest to overall continue to maintain your forest. Now, the exception, of course, is many forest management companies are also in the real estate business. So if you happen to live near a mountain lake or a big growing city like Atlanta or Seattle, a lot of times the sprawl or the new development happens in forested areas, and frequently it's the forest management companies do have some incentive to sell off parts of the forest for conversion. That would be the example in the United States of deforestation, is typically urban sprawl or development in mountain areas. Otherwise, forests are regenerated through some combination of natural regen, which basically just means letting trees regrow, or planting. But I want to point out that whether your issue is water, biodiversity, climate change, you might hear, oh, we plant 10 seedlings for every tree we cut. Well, older, mature forests and the complexity that come with them are not replaced by monocultural tree plantings. It tends to be the commercial species that's replanted. And in the case of that picture, Doug fir would be the example. Different things in different parts of the country. But, just because they're replanted doesn't mean that you've immediately restored all the ecological values that were part of that forest when it was a standing mature forest.
Yeah, which brings us to the next question. Are those old growth trees are the trees of the old growth forest still absorbing carbon? The forest is, I believe, but you might speak to that.
Yeah, there's been a bit of a misconception that somehow younger trees store more carbon. No, actually, okay, I'm going to generalize because this is the stuff of PhD dissertations, but and I don't have a PhD. But generally speaking, the older the tree, the more it's storing up to a certain point. But for a Doug fir, that certain point might be 600 or 700 years old, certainly at least a couple hundred years old. And most Doug fir in the Western US is being managed on a 40-year rotation, so cutting on a 40-year cycle. Letting it grow to just 70 or 80 years old, research has shown, can store about 25 to 30% more carbon while still delivering the same volume to the marketplace. So letting trees grow older is actually one of the most well-established ways to protect water, biodiversity, store more carbon while also generating volume, because one big tree brings a lot more volume to the marketplace if you let it grow, say, 70 years instead of 40 years. So you can kind of have the best of all worlds with this longer rotation. Of course, it costs money to let trees grow longer, so that's the challenge for a commercial operator.
Yeah, thank you. That is a topic that Jason Grant addressed in the webinar he did for us last summer. So, and that is recorded and on our YouTube channel. That's the one that David referred to. David, this next question is for you. Does the Origin app, which you've told us is going to come out next week on Earth Day, does it provide information only on the country of origin and species, or does it overtly help consumers avoid wood that is likely to be illegally logged?
Right now, in the first iteration, it's just telling you information about the species of wood and the country where it was harvested. And for us, that's important because the company needs to know first where it came from. And if they can actually find out where it came from, then that means they also know the whole supply chain, and they're able to then address other issues that might come out along the supply chain as well.
Yeah, good. It is great that that app is coming soon, and that website you told us about, Brad, is here. These are things that make it easier for consumers to make the choices we know they want to make for more eco-friendly product. Our research shows that almost everybody is worried about the state of the planet, and they want to make choices that are less destructive. We have another question here for you, David. You said that 300 to 100 billion of the wood that is traded is illegally logged. Is that an annual figure, is the question?
Yes, it is an annual figure. Sorry for not clarifying that.
That's okay. And I know that we learned from our friends at World Wildlife Fund that 20 to 50% of all timber traded internationally is illegal. Incredibly high amount, and that illegal logging is the third largest transnational crime. So it's a really big deal. And since our industry is so fragmented, we do find we're a place where some of this stuff can be hidden. So I thank you both again for all you're doing to help us avoid that bad wood. And we have reached the end of our hour here. We do have we've got interior designers in the audience who want support in having conversations with their suppliers, because they're not manufacturing anything, but they're specifying everything. So how can we ensure that good wood is used in the projects that we are specifying? And I would say look for FSC certification and use the Origin app to find out where the wood comes from. But I want to give you each a chance to say something about having conversations with suppliers.
Well, the Climate Smart Wood sourcing, the website that was the second one I mentioned, it actually has sample specification language that architects and interior designers can put into their plans. I mean, frequently, it's going to take more than just a couple sentences saying use FSC, but at least if you put that in there and in a way that is both accurate and demonstrates that you mean it and it's not just a throwaway, then it starts a conversation with suppliers, and that's really an important step. in making sure that you actually are sourcing the FSC product.
Yeah, good, good.
And I would say along the lines of the Origin app, I mean, what we'd like consumers and any kind of users of wood to be doing is just asking more questions, asking where the wood came from. And the answer to that question can't be, oh, it was made in China. You know, that the answer needs to be, well, where did the wood itself come from? Because if you don't know where the wood came from, then there is a good chance, again, if it came from a high-risk country, it was a species which could have come from a high-risk country, there's a good chance that it was illegally logged.
Yeah, yeah. And so having a policy written down that is the sort of the list of questions you're going to ask is a good way to guide a conversation like that. Good.
Exactly.
Good. Thank you both so much. It has really been great to hear from you. I appreciate the expertise you've shared and the work that both your organizations are doing. So thank you, Brad. Thank you, David. Thank you, audience. I hope we'll all meet again next month for next month's webinar.
Thank you, Susan.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Bye.